Right. So, my name's Joanna Evans. I serve as Vice President and Publications Chair on the board of AQSG. And the Publications Committee consists of 15 members who volunteer to work on AQSG's publications, including Uncoverings, blanket statements, quilt study books, and related projects such as posters and previews and our mentoring program. As you know, AQSG worked on a strategic plan last year to guide and prioritize our work in the coming years. That work identified the need to update our research journal, and our Uncoverings editor, Sharbreon, has worked with the committee to develop some new guidelines, which she will discuss today. And I will share a brief word with you about Sharbreon. Um, Dr. Plummer is a strategist, researcher, educator, and artist with more than 14 years of nonprofit management experience with an emphasis on the arts. Her practice has involved cultivating resources and programs for communities of creators across the South whose work advances freedom, liberation, and social change. Dr. Plummer has facilitated and presented work at institutions such as Project Row Houses, the African American Museum in Philadelphia, Rhode Island School of Design, Americans for the Arts, Berkeley Art Museum and Pacific Archive, and several others. A few of her creative projects include her internationally distributed zine, Diasporic Threads, Black Women, Fiber, and Textiles from 2022, and curatorial projects such as Stitching Abolition, Chicago 2022, and Mirrored Migration in New York 2017. She has also been featured as an artist in residence at Rogers Art Loft in Las Vegas and Architopia in Oaxaca, Mexico. And it is my great pleasure to hand this over to Sharbreon, who has put an incredible amount of thought, research, time, energy, and excitement into this work. And we are so lucky to have her. Welcome, Sharbreon.
Thank you, Joanna. And thank you for that lovely introduction. I will never not be bashful when people read things off. So thank you for, just being your wonderful self. And thank you to everyone who's here today. I'm really excited to be here with you and to share more about Uncoverings and what's developed. As Joanna alluded to and Stephanie, we'll have some time for Q&A towards the end. But it's my hope that what I've put in today's presentation will really allow you to both understand what some of these changes mean, but also kind of the thought that has gone behind them and how it is that we can, implement them thoughtfully as a collective. So without further ado, we'll get straight to it. I will share my screen. And can someone give me just a thumbs up or a reaction to let me know that you can see it? Great. Thank you, Stephanie. Okay. So without further ado, Uncoverings, growth, evolution, and what's next. So a little bit about what we will cover today. I'll tell you a little bit about me. Joanna did a beautiful job, so we can breeze past that. Uncoverings, just collectively us thinking about where we've been. So the journal's history and existing model, a little bit about strategic planning and how these changes emerged, the new submission formats. I know that you saw the letter that went out as well as the one pager, but I'll dive back into that again for folks who either may not have seen it, or if you're like me, it's just helpful to hear someone talk through it. The evaluation guidelines, so how we assess these new formats with rigor, reviewer expertise and my thoughts around an open call, and how we think about who reviews what, because I know folks have had a lot of questions about that. And then I also wanted to have, I think, a really important conversation about how we define rigor as a membership, as an organization. I'll close us out with a few sort of broad answers about the FAQs I've gotten so far, because I've gotten a lot of very similar questions, and I think I can catch most of them here, but we'll also have time towards the end for additional Q&A. So little bit about me. Um, I'm from South Louisiana. I always share that because that is a deep part of my work, being a Southerner. I've worked in the arts and culture sector for over 15 years in nonprofit settings. Now I consult full time. I've served as an editor and designer for the Journal of Cultural Research in Art Education, have also edited exhibition catalogs and written for many, and served as a reviewer for several other journals. Currently, I'm an independent researcher, so the professoriate was not for me. I knew that from day one because I like to be a practitioner and to engage with people and get to know people and their stories. I feel really passionately about that. I consider myself a public scholar, meaning that I enjoy taking things that may seem inaccessible, be it due to literal barriers in terms of like paywalls or inaccessibility in language and thought, and create ways for that to be shared with the public and to sort of open up dialogue and conversation. That's kind of how Diasporic Threads came out. Also, an artist and a writer, and I studied at The Ohio State University, which is where I received my PhD. These are just a few of the things that I've done. Of Salt and Spirit, Black Quilters in the American South is an exhibition catalog from a show I curated the end of 2024. We already talked about Diasporic Threads, and I put shh at the bottom of this slide because don't tell my editor that I showed y'all this picture. This is the only time I've shown this publicly, but I have a new book coming out in the fall. It's being published through Chronicle Books titled Stories in the Seams, A People's History of Black Quilts and Their Makers. Very excited about that. So, without further ado, Uncoverings, where we have been. If you've been interested in submitting or if you've submitted already, then you know that for over 4 decades, we have been the foremost peer-reviewed journal for original quilt scholarship. Typically, this has looked like 4 to 6 papers accepted annually. 6 to 9,000 words has been the word count previously. And we sort of kept ourselves true to one format, the research article. We do blind peer reviews by folks who are generalists as well as expert readers. And with our evaluation forms, we look at significance, quality of research, presentation of the work, and publication readiness. As you know, we have our presentations at a seminar that are beautifully orated, where we get to hear from the researchers, authors themselves about their work. And then, of course, we have the physical published inbound volume. And now, thanks to Nancy and all of your collective support, we can access them online. So cheers to us for that. And so, how did we get to this sort of period where we are now? The bridge to that was our strategic planning process, which I was really excited and happy to attend and also participate in and listen. And so, there's one priority specifically, this falls into all of it, but strategic priority number 2 in particular focuses on advancing quilt scholarship in the community that sustains it. So it's to promote high standards for quilt-related study by curating research, publishing significant work, and fostering interdisciplinary learning. So in terms of objectives, that means identifying and elevating emerging voices in the quilt research field. So bringing in new knowledge that can be furthered and fostered and mentored, expanding collaboration with academic and museum-based scholars. So one of the things I love most about Uncoverings is that the more I work with authors and the more that I engage with past authors and hopefully potential contributors, so many people in membership have such rich lives that fall far beyond quilt scholarship. So you too are independent researchers engaging in some really special work. And so how do we also continue to bridge people in at these sort of cross disciplines? And that's already really been present. And then additionally, we want to highlight diverse and interdisciplinary perspectives on quilt study. So expanding more of what we do. What we hope to get through this sort of implementation of strategic priority number 2 is that we can see an increase in annual submissions from current membership. We still receive a good amount, but if we do track and study what submissions have looked like over time, even prior to my tenure, then we can say without doubt that there has been a decline in what we typically receive, and there's a number of reasons for that. We also want to raise visibility and grow interest in AQSG as always. and also deepen connections between quilt research and underrepresented disciplines. And at last seminar, when we gave our publications presentation, there were a lot of you in the room that had some really beautiful ideas that I think can work well with where we're headed. And one thing I want to emphasize here is that some members may worry that expanding means diluting. And so I feel as though, you might say, well, does expansion mean a loss of rigor? I will address that in a few slides, but the short answer is no. Rigor is non negotiable. What changes is the forms in which rigorous work can appear, right? Okay. So, as you all saw in the letter, we talked a little bit about how this expansion looks. So there are a handful of shifts that I proposed first to the publication committee and then to the board, and had a lot of really good feedback, dialogue. And this is where we landed after those conversations. So, first, articles and interviews. Articles are what we are known for. It is what we remain committed to. And my thought was also to include interviews because so much of the work that I know I do, so many of you do, and as I continue even my own growth as a researcher and a scholar, involves speaking to and talking to people. Now, for some of us, right, if we're looking at 18th, 19th century, some of those folks may not be here, but in a more contemporary sense, there are so many of you actually who are such a wealth of knowledge and possess so much history as it pertains to quilt research, quilt study, other forms of expertise. Why not be able to capture that in a way that allows the individual to essentially also be a data source? So again, articles, long form research. We also have structured conversations. I want to emphasize here that the interviews must have analysis beyond a transcript. I won't be publishing just a full conversation of back and forth. I want to know how you're interpreting that. I want to know how you're engaging with it. Also, just to note, the word count floor here has been lowered to 4,000 to encourage participation from scholars and folks who may have substantial contributions that maybe aren't quite at 6,000. And we had a very wide gap between blanket statements and uncoverings. And the more that I spoke to folks, whether at seminar, whether emails, et cetera, I always hear or would hear, I have an article, but it's not quite 6,000. And in many ways, that forces people to self opt out. More often than not, I have heard others self opt out versus submitting and then being told, oh, this isn't sufficient. And so to kind of close that gap a bit more, but still allow enough space for substantive research, I thought let's start at 4,000. So reducing by about 2,000 or so words. The image count remains the same. And so that's that first portion in a nutshell. As far as exhibition focused studies, exhibitions themselves, as we know, are sites of knowledge production. And so for me, it was important, and with publications committee, many others, that this wasn't a place where we simply housed exhibition reviews that were, subjective opinions. This is us looking at folks who are perhaps in curatorial studies, museum professionals, art historians, even independent curators, many folks like you who are both collectors, but who also organize things outside of your research practice. You're doing quilt related work in institutional settings. What's the research process for that? What did you implement during your curatorial process that might support quilt studies at large? And then what knowledge was produced or what new findings came from piecing these works together? And that's not to say that you can't talk about the work and what's depicted, right? We all want to hear about the quilts. We love the quilts. I love the quilts. But I think it is important to not have that be sort of where things start and stop. And then lastly, visual essays. This is where scholarship can meet artistic storytelling. Arts-based research is a field of study that I love. I've seen so many beautiful possibilities with. And so images really function as evidence or data and an argument. So I know this is something that's a bit newer for folks, but I want to just emphasize these are not photo albums. I know it's 2,000 words max. That means if you have images and you have text, the writing has to be precise and analytically purposeful. So you can have a practice-based research visual essay by a quilter, someone doing a material analysis that's a bit more brief, some conservation case studies, digital humanities projects that involve visual essays. And with this one, the max is 10 images. Again, all formats still require 5 to 7 keywords in an abstract, and blind peer review does still apply to all. And I see some things came in the chat, either Stephanie or Carrie. If there's something I should pause with, feel free to jump in and interrupt me. I'm afraid to touch too many things because screens get tricky. So I'll keep going through, but if
No,
anything comes
you're
up,
good.
jump
Keep
in.
going.
Okay.
You're good. Keep going.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So advancing ahead and talking about evaluation, I am excited to share that we will continue with the same 4-part structure like we do on our forms. It's a 10-point scale across the board, but now there are questions that are adapted to each format. And I allude to this a little bit later in the presentation, but as Joanna spoke to, I have worked really hard to develop draft requirements, evaluative formats that can speak to each of these new formats or expanded formats that I've proposed. So as we look at this table, I want to kind of talk you through those 4 tenets. So first we have significance. What's the contribution to quilt scholarship? But now we're adapting it to the format's mode of knowledge production. So correlating the questions with the submission type. We have quality of research and analysis. So scholarly rigor in this case, depending on the format, looks like a curatorial argument. What's the visual inquiry? Or what is the qualitative methodology that's used and is it employed correctly? With presentation, we still want to see organization, clarity, visual textual integration with the visual essays, and editorial structure, especially with interviews. The structure and how it is that you take someone through your conversation, in addition to the interpretation of it, both of those things are equally important. And then publication readiness is the same scale, and it's either publishable with minor editing or not publishable. And in between, we have some where, if you need to tweak it a bit, we can do that. And so when we think about quality, right, with exhibition focused studies, it's the quality of the curatorial and scholarly analysis. So the curatorial argument, what knowledge the exhibition produces, what is the question? Because even when you shape, many of you have shaped exhibitions, you are asking the curatorial question, how is that thesis or that question answered, and is it attended to properly in that case study? With visual essays, we look at visual and scholarly inquiries. So the image as data and argument. So it's not just, look at my work, here's my artist statement, but what is this artifact, item, quilt, etc., telling us? And if it is something that someone is making, how are they maybe using said imagery? I know a lot of folks here do political quotes to tell us more about contemporary issues, present times, maybe how they're organizing with people and how quilts can be a site of organization, activism, etc. But practice-based research is intended to serve as a methodology. With interviews, it's the quality of research and the analytical framing that I just mentioned a moment ago. So analysis beyond transcription, qualitative methodology, and then ethics and positionality, which I'll talk about in a moment. But just to kind of clarify for this slide, what I mean by that is, as an interviewer, are you aware of your positionality? If you're interviewing people who are a part of a community that has been historically marginalized, how are you handling that with care? If any of you have gone through an academic process, the IRB exists for a reason. So if you are dealing with delicate subject matter or you're in a position of power, as it pertains to who it is that you're interviewing, how have you attended to that? And is what you're doing and how you're going about that study being implemented in an ethical way? So, of course, new evaluative formats and new rubrics can only work if we have reviewers who can use them. So that brings us to a little more about the reviewer pool. So as we all know, quilt study has to remain at the center of everything. This is not me saying, oh, we just pull in folks from other places and now this is just strictly an art journal. No, you still need to be able to tell me and tell us as the readership how this pertains to quilt study. And so here are some proposed guiding principles that I'm proposing, and we'll talk about, we meaning Publications Committee, we'll talk about this later this month, actually, to talk through. But these are what I've proposed so far, and a little bit about what the profile of a reviewer might look like, right? So I didn't think it would be fair to propose these things without maybe making some suggestions. And again, this is like suggested but not limited to. I just wanted to offer something to give folks to build off of. So first, fluency of knowledge. We want folks who have either scholarly credibility or familiarity with certain creative or curatorial practices in addition to a relationship to quilts, textiles, etc. Quilt study at the center, as I mentioned a moment ago, adjacent expertise that is evaluated through relevance to quilt research. So do they know and do they possess the knowledge and capability to anchor what they're reading in quilt study, even if they do have that fluency in the first point? Format specific criteria. So we assess quality within the norms of the format, not article only standards. Because if we apply article standards to things that are not traditional articles, it's actually not giving us the answers and the clarity and the depth that we want. And even something like transitional pairing, which I know we have mentors for um, paper submitters, for authors, for people who want to submit. What would it look like to have new format reviewers paired with experienced generalists or others who have served as reviewers either currently or in the past to better integrate them into AQSG and also to help them understand a bit more perhaps how they can look and evaluate the work with a rigorous and critical eye. And so here you'll see for the 3 expanded formats, I have some suggestions for who those individuals might be. So for exhibition studies, it could be curators, museum professionals, museum studies faculty, art historians with curatorial experience, et cetera. Visual essays, art historians who know how to engage in visual analysis, even folks who might be trained as artists, folks who might be quilters, who also engage research, digital humanities scholars, conservation professionals, and for interviews, perhaps oral historians, ethnographers, qualitative researchers, folklorists, or even folks who write and do long form arts journalism or arts writing. And to go to this bottom portion of the slide, at the next publications meeting, I'll be presenting thoughts for recruitment and a call for reviewers. I have some draft language to present to them that we'll again go through. If this is something you might be interested in, or you know someone who may be, please let me know, let us know, so that we can make sure that you are updated. As you will be, it'll get sent through membership. But if you're especially excited, I am not hard to reach, please reach out. And even if you have questions, you're not sure, I'm always happy to answer questions. Okay. This is something that I have been especially excited to discuss because I think that as a writer, as an editor, but even as just a human, I feel that language is really important and words matter and definitions matter quite a bit. And one of the things that I have heard a lot is the rigor of Uncoverings, right? We have something that is important to protect, preserve. We want quality. We don't want it diluted. I can reassure you, I don't want those things to happen either. But I think if we talk about rigor, it's important to actually be able to name what that means for us. I have some definitions here I'll talk about in a moment. But before I say that, I actually went, after I received a lot of questions about these changes when they were announced with the letter that I wrote, a lot of folks reached out with questions about rigor. And so that led me down a little bit of a rabbit hole. And I went on our website and I looked through all of our publications materials that we share with any potential authors that exist on the website. I read it. I even did the control find function. We actually don't mention rigor anywhere. I was very surprised. And so with that, I thought it would be a good moment for us as a membership, but also us as a committee, the publications and the board to actually be able to pin some things down. So here's just a cursory scan of some of what we see in the field. Sage Encyclopedia of Research Methods defines rigor as the degree to which research methods are scrupulously and meticulously carried out in order to recognize important influences occurring in the process of conducting the research. In the Quality Matters article, Rigor is intentionally crafted and sequenced learning activities and interactions that are supported by research and provide students the opportunity to create and demonstrate their own understanding. And then an Informing Science Journal, which I found this to be very interesting and funny. They found that rigor definitions fall into two categories. So compliance-based, meaning you follow established protocols. And of course, we have to establish what those protocols are. And criteria-based, meaning meeting standards appropriate to context, which I spoke about in the previous slide. They note specifically, there is no clear consensus regarding what rigor means. And part of why I really wanted to have this conversation and present this today is because it is very challenging when you have so many people who have so many thoughts about what this means. What that creates is this, very subjective approach, which can be really tricky when we're actually trying to create a system and a method that is both definitely rooted in scholarship, in the discipline of research, but that can also be fair and equitable. So again, here, the common thread we see across all, there's a focus on method and protocol. But what's unexamined is whose methods, whose protocols, and what happens when the work takes a form that doesn't fit the inherited template. So to advance here, this is a working sort of definition of rigor for uncoverings. And by definition, I don't mean this is, I'm not the judge and the jury, I'm not banging a gavel, but something to get us closer to a shared standard that we can actually point to. And so here it says rigor is the demonstrated accountability of a work to its evidence or data, its methodology, and its contribution to the field of quilt study at large. This means that the author has clearly articulated the answer to the so what question, why does this matter? Demonstrated how knowledge was produced, has engaged in deep study of their sources, and has situated their work within a broader scholarly conversation, meaning that we can point to, again, where you're pulling things from, who you're citing, and how you're furthering that discussion. Rigor doesn't necessarily mean adherence to a single disciplinary tradition, format, or cultural framework. We actually already see that evidenced in the depth and breadth of articles that are in Uncovering. They employ so many different methods. It shows that the work can withstand informed scrutiny, which is what we have through the review process, on the terms that best align to the mode of inquiry. So across all of our formats, we need terms that help us to justify, scrutinize, even though that word is harsh, but evaluate, right, those modes of inquiry by folks who are trained to do so. So for me, what rigor requires is an accountability to evidence, meaning the author handles sources, archival, visual, etc., with care and transparency. So you can't just assert things and say, this is fact. How? Show me. Point me in the direction of how you got there. Methodological transparency. So as a reader, as an editor, all of us, we can understand how the author arrived at those claims. What framework guided the inquiry? Was it narrative research? Was it qualitative, quantitative, mixed methods? And why that approach fits the research question. So I had to use narrative inquiry because I'm engaging in oral history in support of XYZ thesis. And then contribution to the field. That means the work advances quilt scholarship. It means it adds knowledge and reframes understanding or opens up new lines of inquiry. So as we know, even with pre-existing articles before these proposed changes, what we publish, we don't want to publish the same article 15 times. Even if you are focusing on Baltimore album quilts, what else are you bringing to the conversation? It's kind of like double dutch. Okay, someone had their time. Now, when you jump in, what are you adding? What are you doing? How are we layering this lovely stew, gumbo of research and scholarship? And what are the flavors and things that you're adding to create depth? I have here, as it pertains to all of the formats, and even I didn't mention updates before, but updates will continue. Here are just some suggestions for what that looks like. Get my notes here. So I'll cover this really quickly. I want to monitor my time. Okay, we're good. So articles and interviews. How do articles and interviews look or remain rigorous? Much of this applies to what we already do with articles, but I've added a little bit more for interviews. They offer a clear thesis supported by evidence. There's a command of relevant literature, who you're citing. And for interviews, analysis that, again, simply does not recall a transcript. The interviewee's voice, meaning who is participating, the participant that you're speaking to, their voice is honored also as a site of knowledge. So you're just not the sole expert speaking on someone's behalf. And the author's job as an interpreter of this larger conversation is what applies to scholarly approach. So we should be able to see how they're evaluating, what they're pulling from. If I am, I don't know, working with a group of quilters in the UK, and I want to understand what it means to engage in that sort of work in a place-based way, I need to be able to point to some methods that help us to evaluate what that is. That simply isn't my opinion and what I think. I need to be able to cite that. For exhibition-focused studies, the author presents a coherent curatorial argument. If they are not the curator, they are still able to articulate how the show came together and what influenced that specific assembly of works, selection of artists, subjects that are covered, etc. And most importantly, how that exhibition contributes to the furthering of quilt knowledge, quilt study, quilt research. And so through data and analysis to support that thesis, because the thesis is still central across the board, readers can engage with the author's curatorial decisions as intellectual choices and applied methods, and not just like, oh, this is beautiful. I love seeing all these things paired together. If any of you have curated a show, you know that selections of work, the flow of the show, all of these things influence both the viewer experience and can also help to emphasize certain themes, points of inquiry, questions that you have, or you may want others to contemplate. All of those things matter. For visual essays, as I alluded to before, the images are data and evidence to further an argument. We already do this in articles, right? But the emphasis here is that you are either as someone who has a practice-based or a research-based, practice-based in research, sorry, I got tongue-tied, a practice-based in research, or you are a maker that also engages in research through making, you can integrate that as data. Or for things that might be focused more on material or conservation, you are using a more consolidated format to give us a deep dive into a very specific thing. And I emphasize specificity because the written component here is roughly 2,000 words. That means it has to be precise and clear. Readers need to understand how image and text, if you bring these two together in this format, we realize they can't operate without each other. They both had to be shared so that we can get a full grasp of what it is that you're describing. So again, this might be practice-based research, a material analysis, a conservation study, and digital humanities. All of these things also have methodological standards that we can point to. If an author is submitting, they too need to be able to cite and point to in the endnotes where they're pulling these assertions and claims from. So if you are applying this method, help us understand why it's relevant. And then for updates, we know it's new or additional information of significance that advances the previously published paper. So let's see, let me go down here. So just as I look at my next slide, one of the things that I also want to emphasize is that if we look at these methods or these approaches and we dismiss them as insufficiently scholarly, that doesn't necessarily protect rigor. It creates a narrowing and it excludes actually a lot of communities whose quilt traditions we study. So this isn't about me pointing fingers or anything like that. It's about being honest about what we need to grow or have another perspective that can then deepen something else. I see how all of these formats can speak to one another and then can possibly give way to new articles, because for many of these, like for example, with exhibitions, we all attend museums, we patronize different shows, et cetera. Unless you know the curator or you happen to go to a talk or things like that, there's so much on the back end that we don't see that can provide so much depth to what it is that we produce through our articles. So this is about creating other methods to fill voids and gaps in knowledge and history to deepen what it is that we're studying as a whole. So I want to emphasize again that some of the most important scholarship in our field draws on different areas like personal narrative, lived experience, communal knowledge, and oral tradition. And those are not lesser forms of inquiry. They are established research traditions with their own standards of rigor. And I just want to name A lot of us tend to study cultures, practices, things that are outside of our own. These are all things that we engage in, many of us, not all, sorry, but many of us, even if we don't see them as such, or we might not explicitly say it. But as I name this, I really want you to consider how much of this you may or may not have engaged with, um, whether you heard it described as such or not. So, with oral history and community based research, that's knowledge that's preserved and transmitted through voice. If we do a study or a project on the history of AQSG from folks who founded it and who were here at its origins, that's oral history. This has been central to how a lot of quilt traditions are documented and understood because I can't go get a BFA in quilting. It's something that's shaped by people. We have practice-based and studio research, so it's knowledge produced through the act of making. We go to these talks, we go to these different experiences, and we are learning from and engaging with quilters. We want to know why they made something, what they learned from when they were making, more about their creative process, because it's a form of inquiry and evidence into itself. When we think about indigenous and Afro-diasporic knowledge systems, oftentimes these are things that are rooted in cultural traditions that either weren't documented or simply couldn't be documented because it wasn't safe to. It connects to spiritual practices and other intergenerational transmissions that shaped centuries of textile based making and quilting. With ethnographic and qualitative methods, these are things that are grounded in observation, participation, and dialogue, and it centers the voices and perspectives of makers and communities. How many times have we seen interpretations of what has happened in G's Bend? Here we go. Material culture and visual analysis. This is reading objects, textiles, and images as primary evidence. When we're at seminar and folks are bringing out artifacts and we're sitting with them and we're looking at them and they're interpreting and we're having this back and forth in this dialogue, that's the oral piece. Now, I want to know which of you is going to take that and actually put it to text so that we can have that captured in Uncoverings. The quilt is a language, it's a document. And so this statement at the bottom, I won't restate it, but I just still have it here because I cannot emphasize this point enough. I want us to think about how expansion isn't just saying, oh, we accept anything, because that's not how I even live my life or dictate my research. It's about allowing us to say, okay, where are some gaps and what are the formats that can fill them? And so with that, I want to bring us to a kind of comparison about what happens when we don't define rigor. So when we use rigor without defining it, many of us, we have our own things that keep us comfortable. That can allow us to default to what feels familiar. And oftentimes what's familiar is shaped by who has historically had access to academic publishing. And I always find that interesting because that's not to say that AQSG has not had academics. Surely it has. But many of the folks, especially in the earlier days of Uncoverings, saw that there was a gap. And even still to this day, are independent researchers who their love and passion around quilts is in many ways a second life, a second interest beyond what they already did. And so we can't simply say, well, this is what somebody else does at said university. These are things that can help us, but we still have the autonomy and spirit to be able to say, these are things that can provide a skeleton for us, but we then give it the depth and the body that it needs to live and breathe as a standard. So without a shared definition, again, rigor defaults to familiar. One format becomes an invisible standard. And that's the thing that I don't want. When I came on, as editor, people asked me all these questions. And to be quite honest with everybody here, I was like, there are rules that I don't even know. There's unspoken rules. Wait, who told you that? I don't know. Well, if you want to get published, you have to do this. Who said that? We have, we have the guidelines on the site for a reason. And I really want to start to detangle some of like the unspoken things, because what that does is it creates intimidation. Should you take your research seriously? Absolutely. Should you be intimidated to a point where you don't want to submit? No, I do not want that. I want to see submission rates go up. Unfamiliar methods are perceived as lesser. We already spoke about that. Communities and traditions are excluded without anyone naming why. Whereas if we pivot to a shared definitions, that means standards are named and applied equitably. If somebody asks you, well, what does rigor mean? You can look right here. This is what you follow. Multiple formats can be evaluated on their own terms. Diverse methodologies can be recognized as legitimate, and the field can expand without losing its foundation. So again, I'm not saying this to be overcritical. I just want us to observe how if we don't name standards, we produce homogeneity, and naming rigor is what allows us to apply it equitably so that there's no question. I personally don't want to be the person to have to, say, oh, Sharbreon's engaging in partiality. She's partial. I want to remain as impartial as possible by having things to follow. That's a system of checks and balances for me. And that gives membership the clarity that it needs to continue to do great work. So again, this is an invitation. This definition, again, is a work in progress. It's how I'm approaching my work as an editor. It's grounded in my own training, my lived and professional experience, and really my belief of what uncoverings can be. But I know this has to live beyond my reasoning. I was joking with Joanna and Stephanie Carey before I logged on. I was like, I'm presenting all of this. I am not a dictator. I simply give suggestions, and it's up to leadership to decide how things want to advance and for membership to engage in thoughtful dialogue. So I'm offering this to Publications Committee and to this membership as a starting point. I hope we can continue to refine it together, hold ourselves to it collectively, and use this as a shared foundation as things continue to evolve. And I just leave you with the question of, what does rigor mean to you? And so very quickly, because we're pivoting now into Q&A, and so I wanted to at least kick us off with a few things that I have gotten so far. So what will be the number of traditional articles versus new formats? I cannot say, I don't have a thing in mind of, oh, well, it'll be 4 of this and 2 of that. What I can say without a doubt is that more traditional or our usual research articles will still have the most real estate in uncoverings that we are committed to. So bringing in these new formats is not my way of saying, oh, get those other things out of here. They will be added, but the articles are the focus. That is what we're known for. That is what we do. How will the new formats be reviewed? I shared that with you. Should things advance, we get it approved. And of course, there's feedback that needs to happen with those with the committee. We will have forms that can then be paired with reviewers for said things. I think it's still important for them to see and understand where articles get scored and graded. Well, not graded, evaluated, but we will have forms that also follow those systems that have supplemental questions. How will the rubrics work now? As I shared before, still same 4 areas. They still have the same headers. The questions match some of those evaluative criteria I shared with you. It's still that 10-point system, and it can go from minor edits to not publishable. When are the guidelines going to be shared? Later this month, we have publications meeting. After we have the deliberation we need to have, and they'll get this from me next week so they can have time to review it. We have to have dialogue and then get the approvals in place, and then they can be updated on the website. I've updated the entire Uncovering Submissions Guidelines document. I have the language for reviewers. I even have the reviewer profiles expanded, and the rubrics are updated. And then lastly, how will seminar presentations work? Right now, the thing that is most important is that those folks who have submitted traditional research articles will be prioritized at seminar with regard to presentations, at in-person seminar, I should say, whereas winter virtual seminar is also an option for folks to present who may use those expanded formats. But as we know, so much of our support and sponsorship comes from those articles. And so it's important to make sure folks have that time. And should there be space and opportunity, then we can talk about what those other formats might look like integrated into seminar in a multitude of ways. And then lastly, thank you. Thank you for your time and attention. I know I have given you a lot of data, a lot of information. I appreciate all of you so much for being so engaged and so thoughtful in your questions. I take this very seriously and respect all the work that has happened thus far with Uncoverings, and I hope to continue to steward it in a really great way. So that's all from me.
Awesome. Great job, Sharbreon. So that we have a chance for everyone, I'll start with the questions that have been raised in the chat, and then we will go have time for people to ask questions in person or in person, in quotes, um, as we have time. Uh,
Mhm.
just to start off, Hallie commented that regarding the word count, she had um, gotten submissions to blanket statements in the past that were too long for her to publish as a single article, so she'd have to split them into two. So the word lowering the word count, there'll be some overlap there about of things
Mhm.
that could fit into uncoverings. Carolyn asks, can you explain your thinking about the limit to the number of images, given that the cost of color printing is no longer prohibitive? I'm thinking particularly of the visual essays format.
Yes. So while the cost of color printing isn't necessarily prohibitive, my thought is with visual essays, typically that standard has looked like a fewer number of images. It's meant to be a more sort of consolidated, concise examination of something. So if it's a presentation of a work or a few works, you only have 2,000 words. That was my thought of around what might make for a sufficient count where you can have a 2,000 word accompaniment with more images that requires more explanation and detail. They might actually want to utilize an article for that. But also, depending on how things pair up, it actually does. It's not about the color printing, but it's about the size of uncoverings itself and how it is that it's printed. So, depending on the length, depending on the different formats that are included, I wanted to be able to have enough flexibility, especially with this being a newer format, to be a bit more modest. And then in the future, if we find that, okay, we've done this a few times, it's tested, we like how it feels, and there is some room to have a little more expansion or wiggle room with other ones, then let's do that. But I try to be fair in thinking about the length of the written text and what accompanying images could be. Um, so that we could at least have a starting point, but that doesn't mean that this is fixed in stone. And one thing I'll say you didn't ask, but just add really quickly is that it's my goal to have this really be a close watching during this strategic planning implementation period. And then once that's done, we can come back to the drawing board to see where tweaks might need to be, unless something glaring comes up in the process that we need to attend to.
And Charlene asks, can you please show the content slide again, the one at the beginning? It will help to pose questions.
Can
So,
you clarify exactly which one? Is it the what we're covering or
Charlene, can you unmute yourself and
The table of contents at the beginning, Sharbreon.
yes. Thank you.
and then I'll keep going while folks think about that. Thank you, Sharbreon. This is from Joy and team for this explanation and exploration of clarity, expanding access, and holding space for reflexivity in work and practice.
Mhm.
Lena asked how people can get in touch with you. I went through your website but never received an answer. So,
Thank you, Lena. So apparent, well, two things. One, Squarespace does not like me. I, for whatever reason, am not getting automated emails. My email is my first name. If you want to email me directly, Sharbreon, SHARBREON @gmail.com. Also, if you have emailed me within the past week and a half, please know I'm not ignoring you. I have been editing new articles, managing things from last year, and updating all of these things by myself. So I'm doing my best. But Lena, if you went through Squarespace, I apologize. It is not
Okay,
being
no.
very cooperative.
Okay, thanks, Sharbreon. It's not a really pressing matter, but I'll get in touch with you. Thank you.
Please, please do. Thank you.
also a reminder to everyone that the directory on the AQSG website is available to look up everyone's contact information. And Charbreon's email, I believe, is
Mhm.
also on the publications pages of the website. Um, Katie says, excellent outline, Charbreon. I'm super excited to read and submit to this expanded version.
Please do.
Kathy Woodson, I will always be a reader and not a publisher, but I don't have the expertise or experience to contribute. Our founders would take issue with that. Kathy?
I was even gonna say, I'm like, I don't know if I agree with that. There's always something. So email me, we can talk. But go ahead. Sorry, Joy.
I am the typical member. She says, I appreciate you. I'm not offended or intimidated by your approach. I appreciate
Thank
you
you.
and I'm excited by your contribution.
Thank you, Kathy.
And Eileen says, you mentioned that one goal is to increase the number of submissions. Is there any consideration as to perhaps moving to more than one issue per year if this goal is successful? Oh,
That's
wasn't
a
that
great question.
wonderful to dream about?
It was. We actually had this came up when we had like our larger thinking. We really just sort of threw everything out there and Marie Kondoed it. Like, let's make a mess before we refine it. And I would say two things came up with that. One, there would be a lot of considerations that would have to be put into like call, how things are published and printed because the journal itself or the hard copy corresponds with seminar. But there were some dreams and thoughts about, okay, what might this look like if we do this or that? I think the other thing would be we would really have to consider the financial realities of that, how they are moving, how they're being published, because while this is a benefit to membership, there are some printing costs that are going up, and we're just at a different time right now. So it has been brought up as a possibility. I think anything is possible. We would have to see what makes the most sense fiscally, time wise, and with the current process that we have. And I see Millie and Terry have their hands up too. Yeah.
Okay, and we've also got Katie again. Have you
Okay.
considered doing a special
Oh, sorry.
call for specific subjects?
That was also discussed at one point. I will say that I would like to think about that some more. We're going to try this out, but given just I think especially given the sort of checkpoints about AQSG's age and where we are in terms of like our anniversaries, that could be something good for it, like an anniversary year, like a notable year or something of the sort. But that would definitely have to go before publication. But it's something I've thought about and have dreamt with a few of you about as a possibility for the future, like a thematic sort of call.
And
So we do
Millie,
it with quilts, which is beautiful.
right. Millie, do you want to unmute yourself?
Yes, thank you. Sharbreon, as you know, I am very excited about all of this potential. AQSG has always prided ourselves in having the highest standards of research, publishing it in our journal. But I think this really allows us to combine the rigor, and you did an excellent presentation on that, but also to be on the cutting edge of things. For example, today I was blown away by Terry Walker's presentation about quilts and how they work in making a statement, political statement, a protest statement, or, a stand up for what I believe kind of statement. And she's a political scientist, and there is no room in political science for quilts. Well, if we make room for political science in our research publication, we will be on the cutting edge of something. And what I loved about her presentation, and here's where my question comes, she outlined, her discipline's research methodology, how the research questions are developed and answered, what constitutes rigorous and high quality research. It's different in disciplines. Would we then, with an article that's from, say, political science, or my discipline is education, would we start, or maybe in the abstract, talk about what the standards of research are in that discipline so that people who aren't accustomed with it would have some sort of an orientation? I'm just wondering how that might work.
Yes, yes. And I love Terry. I had a lot of fun with Terry last year for her submission. And we had this exact conversation because she did share with me, I'm not a political scientist, but she did tell me how she was a bit of this like chameleon in this in-between space. I think to answer your first part about the abstract is a good place to sort of note or mention the contents of the paper. But many of the articles, if you look, there's already a space for methodology. Yes, detail that thing, but also part of why I want to get to this definition of rigor or being able to point to that is that now we have, let's say you're in education, here are the methods I'm employing from my training or field of study. Here's what AQSG defines as like scholarly and rigorous. Now the two come together so you can say, method wise, here's what I've attended to here based on what it is that AQSG is asking for. Here's how I've attended to those things. And then that can come together. But I think it is important to detail that because we have folks who are in different disciplines that read uncoverings, and they can speak to that. And I think if we start to see certain patterns or trends in who's submitting, that's even more of a case for how we might think about the kinds of reviewers that we want to have in our selection pool to pull in when we receive those kinds of things.
Okay. Thank you for a great, great presentation.
Thank you.
Terry, you want to unmute yourself and join us?
Who?
Terry Terrell.
Terry
Oh,
Terrell.
sorry. I thought you said Carrie. I'm like, I didn't ask a question. Thank you.
If she's still there.
Terry, are you there? While she's finding her unmute button, I'll say, Amy has a question for you. Have you thought about publishing an online issue? I think this goes back to that issue of publication costs.
Yes. So, I mean, we have it available once it's, complete. But so I guess I want to ask, do you imagine it being something that's different from that, where it's like actually live on the website and people can click through? Because they can now access it without barrier once it's updated post print.
I'm guessing that she's thinking a second volume might be a.
Okay, so yeah, in that case, if we were to think of an additional, okay, I would say I'd be happy to talk about it. I never was just like, yeah, yes or no, because it's not just strictly up to me. But if for whatever reason, let's say we just do a knockout, bang up job, and there are other things that we want people to see, maybe that's part of a conversation where something else can live. So online stuff will not be real. So yeah, Hallie, sorry. So yes, thank you. I did get, Joanna, can I name one thing that someone sent to me directly?
Yes.
Like as a private message, because I know we're over time. Someone asked about the research connected to like the visual analysis, and they're presenting some things and they're not ready to consider publication yet. But if they were, a 10 image limit would make it possible. The text would come back up and enhanced, but not a substitute for what it is that they've developed. In these sorts of instances, if you have questions, I would say reach out to me and we can meet, because I actually would say that that could still be an article. That sounds like an article, like what this person is telling me. So I know some folks might, again, say like, oh, well, you have this image limit. I can't do a visual essay. The thing I want to reinforce to the person who sent this message and to others is before you self opt out, before you limit yourself or say, no, this is not for me, please, I implore you to contact me. If you see me at seminar, catch me at seminar, have a sidebar conversation. So that way we can actually suss some of that out. Because if you talk, and I love when people come to me with their ideas, I can more quickly say yes, no, or maybe you consider this versus you having to do the work of sorting that out for yourself if they're just like nuances that maybe you're uncertain of.
Absolutely. Terry Terrell, are you there? And can you unmute yourself?
Terry also has my number and my email if you need to call me.
I should tell you that while you were speaking, you may have seen lots of hearts and lots of applause.
Thank you.
People have reacted very positively. Does anyone else have, and there's Nancy giving you another heart.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have any more questions for Sharbreon this evening or this afternoon, depending on where you are?
Mm-hmm.
I do, and I apologize. My internet connection keeps blinking out, so if you can't hear me, I'm sorry. I am really interested in this visual essay as an opportunity to reinstitute maybe the concept of learning something from doing, which is one of the main points of what our study quilts are supposed to be about. And often people talk about the quilt and how they did it and don't hit the idea of And this is what I learned from it.
Mhm.
And so I'm hoping that that will inspire people and maybe have people perhaps expand on some of their quilt study discussions.
That's exactly it, Terry. That is like my hope and my thought. We have so many moments where we analyze the work, and these are things that are made and created and generated by members. And we have so many members who make. I love gathering at seminar because I told someone it's the only conference that I can go to, and you see everyone stitching and working and doing things. And so why not have room for us to talk about that aspect of making when we have regional groups and other folks get together? There's so many different things that we talk about, whether it's technical, whether it's creative. There are ways to engage with that work and that methodology. And one thing I'll just say is at seminar, I know we have to sort through different things, but again, if you see me, find me, but there are multiple moments for engagement around this. And it's my goal to have a few touch points where we can have this sort of close conversation and we can ask questions in real time, like in a shared space. Because I know this is something that is continuing to grow and be implemented. And so we'll need to have continued conversation. But that was spot on, Terry. Thank you.
Charlene is asking, could a query letter process be instituted, as many publications use, to help a potential author determine which type of presentation to use?
I think so. I think that's a nice suggestion. There could be a multitude of ways that that could look. It could be more visual, where it's like, do you fit here, 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 here? Yes. So the short answer would be yes. And kind of an aside from this question, I didn't say it explicitly in my presentation, but the thing I want to drive home is I never want anybody to feel like they have to take on a new format because you feel like that's going to get the article accepted. If you want to just do an article, please just do an article. If you're like, I don't know, the first thing about a visual essay, you do not have to do it. There's not this hierarchy of like, well, if you do this, you're guaranteed. You do this, this will be more successful. So I just wanted to emphasize that. But Charlene, thank you for that suggestion. I think that's a great idea.
And I'll underscore again that you can send an email to Sharbreon to see what she has to suggest about a particular topic. Dale.
I love feedback. Please reach
Yeah.
out. Hey, Dale. Good to
Hey,
see you.
Tanya. Yeah, it's good to see you too. Okay, so I think this is really exciting, and I think it has a lot of potential, for new growth. Uh, I, I will just say what I always have loved about AQSG, which is that it kind of straddles that world between amateur and scholar, or let me see, scholar and non-scholar. I'm trying
Mhm,
to say this correctly. And it encourages people who are not from the scholarly world to do the work. And we get so much good work from people who are not scholars. And that's the
mhm,
only concern that I have. You know, uh, uh, your presentation was very, very good. It was intimidating to me.
mhm,
Okay. And so it may have been intimidating to others. And I just want to be sure that we watch for that and
mhm,
and remind people there are mentors, there are ways to bring your passion into a publication,
mhm,
because we don't want to lose them. We don't want to lose people who may not feel comfortable in the scholarly world. Can
mhm.
I say that?
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
And I understand exactly what you're saying. You're talking about independent researcher versus academic researcher, someone who is like trained through these systems. And I
exactly.
hear you completely. One of the things that it was a hope of mine. And once the full materials come out, they're a bit more expansive than my presentation here. I specifically name a variety of people with the hopes that folks can understand this isn't just for the academician. And I actually think what you said gave me a bright idea that I will write down. It's your idea. Is when we put out the new guidelines, I want to make visible the variety of folks who have contributed and name that and make that visible for people. So it's like, what has past authorship looked like? It's run the gamut of people. There's a huge percentage of AQSG membership that are independent researchers. That's why it's like so many people. I learned so much about authors. Some people worked at NASA. Some people were deep sea divers. Other people are real estate moguls and they love quilts. And so they studied those things separately and built that knowledge for themselves. And it's one of the things that I think has also, as you're saying, that is a bit of like a blind spot for me or something that I take for granted, which is because my perception of quilts is always and has always been like for the people, by the people, and communally produced. I automatically assume that everybody else feels that way. And they're like, yeah, like it's a, yes, Nebraska had the certificate program and things like that, but this is not something we go to school to learn. I went to school to learn research methods. Everything I know about quilts and I love about quilts, yes, there are books and publications that have come out that have helped me, but it's been from one-on-one time with people or space or time and space in places where people are gathering and I can listen and observe and work with my hands and that sort of thing. So I think this is a good note for me to be able to make note and perhaps make a few things more visible in those materials that demonstrate how Uncoverings has held submissions and contributions from people who may not fit the traditional academic profile.
Awesome. Awesome. Thanks.
Well
Thank you.
put. Carolyn, you have your hand up.
Yeah, in a sense, I just want to make a comment that feeds very much on from what Sharbreon's just been saying. It's about that walking alongside. I mean, I'm in England. I'm a member of the British Quilt Study Group, and one of my interests is about fabric dyeing techniques and so on. And I've currently got a small group together of BQSG members, and actually there's an American lady as well who's an AQSG. And because I've managed to photograph some dyeing records from the 1820s and 1830s, and they're helping me transcribe it. And so it's I'm not necessarily an expert, but you come and join me. I'll give you these pages and you these pages. You talk to each other about this. We get together online about once a month or so, and we look at the things. We look at this peculiar word that nobody can read. We look at the techniques for, how did he make that color? Oh, look what he says about this. How does that tie in? And then I try and back it up with references and so on. And it's a sort of training process. And that's the sort of thing, that works really well for people who are not so confident in how to start. And then once they get that bug of, actually, this is really interesting. How do I do it? How do I approach a museum curator and say, can I come for a study visit? How do I approach this person and say, I'm interested in the research you're doing. Would you be prepared to give your opinion about this? It's helpful.
Yeah, thank you. And I actually love what you described because depending on which side or which take you wanted to do, your study of dyeing processes and materials could be a visual essay. Your analytical work with the group could be an interview that actually brings you back to expanded knowledge about dyeing from a particular time period or about techniques that, were in antiquity that may not be discussed anymore, and how can that be translated into modern day work. We have a lot of natural dyers in this field and sector. So do you see how, like, again, it allows for room beyond just this reporting? There are really rich and interesting things that can happen when you gather in that way. And that's the kind of thing I don't want to get lost.
Sharbreon, I know we're over, but Joy, who is a new member,
Hi, Joy.
has asked if there is or could be learning sessions or workshops throughout the year, or something to help introduce and or inform about methodology and writing, etc., to help bridge the informal and formal learning / publication, and then virtually ? She says. And we've got a couple of responses to her. We have some recordings available regarding the research path for quilt study in AQSG, and Carrie can send her some links. So I repeat that for others. And Katie also replied, I think. Yes.
Yes.
Here. We could do some more, and we do offer workshops during seminar. And
Hmm.
I also pointed out that we offer mentoring, and to check out the research
Hmm.
tab on the website
Yes.
for more information about mentoring. Do you want to add
Mhm.
anything to that?
I would. Just two quick things. One, to get even more specific, at seminar, we've had, especially these last few, really well attended sessions where people workshop their ideas in real time with others who've either published or who have served as mentors to say, am I headed in the right direction? Is this, where I should go? Or is this thing even a good idea to be put into an article? So that's one thing. But one of the things that I mentioned to you briefly, Joanna, and alluded to in publications is outside of seminar, like, would it be helpful if I'll do it if it's of interest. I'm one of those people, I'll do it if it's of interest. If nobody shows up, then I don't want to do it. But if it's helpful to have like office hours, for lack of a better term, where we're online, I make it available, whether it's once a month or once every few months, just for those general questions and a general feedback session where it's like office hours with the editor. You can sit, we can talk. That now I will say, Joy, not that you're insinuating this, but I just want to make sure folks know you doing that does not mean I'm going to say, Susie from Nebraska came to all the office hours, so she's getting accepted. It still has to be solid and sound. But yeah, something like that, that can be more of an informal space. I have a Zoom account, happy to host it. And that way you can hear from me directly in addition to everything else that everyone has listed.
I think that's a great idea during this time when we're introducing this, and it would be a good follow-up to this session
Hmm.
tonight to do maybe a month from now,
Hmm.
giving some thumbs up,
Great.
a month from now or so to and just see who shows up.
Mhm.
Katie, you have your hand up.
So I just wanted to mention that we have been talking about this in the Showmakers committee about perhaps creating a video series that would help sort of identify methodology and how to do quilt research. And it would be, some short snippet videos that we could post on YouTube. And that's still sort of in the works. We've got to really write them out and develop that sort of outline for them. But I'm hearing more and more that there would be support for that. So we're moving towards that. It's just very slow.
Yes.
Excellent.
Yes. I guess what I'll say, go ahead.
Could I say something? My name's Kathy, and
Hi, Kathy.
I attended the publication workshop at seminar. I mean, that's what they called it. And it really discouraged me because it was all about, okay, this is what you need to do to prepare it for publication. And I'm not anywhere near that. I have a
Mhm.
quilt. I have an idea. I spent 2 years researching it.
Mhm.
But my question is, I don't know where I'm going.
Mhm.
And I don't know if I'm ever going to get there. It's like I'm not sure that there is a destination.
Mm.
I attended a independent research workshop and found out that I basically didn't know what the heck I was doing. And so I need to talk with somebody to say, okay, this is what I've got. Is this feasible? Do I have a destination? Or should I just say, it's a nice quilt. This is what I've learned. The end. And I don't find anything supportive like that in AQSG. It's all about like you've already got this figured out, and what are you going to do with it? And for those of us who don't know where we're going, I don't see support for that.
No, thank you, Kathy. And yes, I will say most of what we present is sort of once you've reached that question of so what, why does this matter? Now here's what you do with it. What you're naming is actually kind of interesting. And I think there's both a lot of possibility, and I'll speak to maybe some things that might help you. What I also want to be kind of like clear and transparent about is the fact that depending on what you're doing and what you're interested in, and even how you interpret research and learn and comprehend and evaluate, that could look a number of ways. There's no one way to get there. So that would require a very like high touch method of engagement with you to understand where you're at, what you're thinking, and really kind of mapping that out. What I will say that perhaps isn't as apparent, but I think could be beneficial for you is if there are folks who have, if there, let's say your quilt is is a quilt that connects to something that's been previously published, are there members that you would be willing to connect with that could actually like talk to you about how they got to their point? We also can engage in that kind of conversation with the mentors. So it's less about them saying, here's what you need to do to get to a paper, and help you sort of whittle down that question. And then also these office hours that I'm talking about, I think that would be a prime opportunity for you to bring that kind of question. So that way, maybe I can give you some things to draw from. I just want to be completely honest that, as you already know, I'm not the expert on every type of quilt everywhere. So in addition to me supporting you with at least the thinking about research question formulation, there may be others, depending on your subject matter, that might have expertise that can help you. I can help you with a roadmap to get to a research question. Once you get into certain particularities, that's where it might be great to connect you to someone else.
I would love to have a mentor. I would like to have someone to talk to. I would like, it's a Quaker quilt. And so I would love to have a mentor, someone that I could talk with, that, might be able to say, okay, well, why don't you look into this? Why don't you look into that? It's just, I've done everything I can think of. And so I need somebody to just say, have you thought about this that I can pursue?
Yeah. So I would say for the digital version of Uncoverings, if you search through the site, and I can't, recall off the top of my head, but you can search by keyword. And if you type in Quaker quilts, you can see who has already written about that within the membership. I'm sure there are others who might be able to point you in the direction of some folks too, who are part of membership or who might be in mentorship. And then between mentorship committee and myself, we are here to support you with some of that thinking around, okay, how do I frame this? How do I take all these things that are floating around and narrow it down into something that can be converted into an article or some other format?
That would be wonderful. Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm glad you asked that, because there may be others who wanted to ask or have that feeling but didn't say it. So I really appreciate you saying it.
Yeah, I think we just need some basic, really basic, not like you've already got this kind of figured out, how do you get it published, but just how do you do research?
Yeah. Great point.
Sharbreon, if I may, I just put in the chat for anyone who's interested the link to the Digital Commons at UNL, where Uncoverings is housed and where you can search it electronically, as you just mentioned. So Kathy, if you want to grab that URL, and anyone else that doesn't have it bookmarked on their computer, there it is.
Yeah.
I think we're winding down, and it is 24 past the hour. Any last questions? And otherwise,
Thanks, Jill.
Thank you so much, Sharbreon. So much work. Folks can't imagine how much work Sharbreon has put into this. Thank you also to the Publications Committee for their work on this as well.
Yes. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
It's a
Sharbreon.
team effort. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Again, reach out. Lena, please email me.
I will. I will.
I don't want to miss you.
And
No.
I put your email in the chat as well.
Oh, good.
So Lena, hopefully you saw that.
Oh, yes. Nope, not a problem. Not a problem. Just
Awesome.
thank you.
Good.
Okay.
All right. Have a wonderful evening, everyone. Rest up for tomorrow. Another big day.
Yes. Have a great one, everybody. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.